1 week season.
Welcome, everybody, to week 14 of Solo Ship. I'm Squirrel Patrol from 444 Football. I'm joined by JM to win from 1 week season. JM, a new environment. Are you on like a 4-poster bed?
Yeah, man. It doesn't stop. I've done like every show from a different location. Dude, we didn't get to do our show, man. When I posted in my journal last week that our show wasn't happening, the emojis reactions were very sad on them. So
Sorry.
people will be glad we're back. But yeah, last week I was in a different location. Yesterday I was Pete and I recorded early this week. I was in a different location yesterday. So I'm all over the place. I'm sitting in a bed. I've got the computer on a pillow so people aren't looking up my nose. Got the microphone in front of me. So yeah, it's we're being as professional as we can be, but we'll bring good information. That's what we need.
The show rolls on, right? Like doesn't matter except for last week. I was out of the country, to be fair.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I did keep an eye on DMs just in case you're like, yeah, let's go ahead and run the show. We worked better for my schedule that we didn't, but the sadness from subs that the show is not going to happen. I was like, well, just in case, let's keep an eye. So yeah, we're back though, and everybody can smile again.
How was your Thanksgiving slate, your week 13, 12? How did everything go?
Yeah, it went well. I was profitable on both slates. No big payouts, but it was above min payouts on both. So 1 tier up on Thanksgiving, 2 tiers up from the bottom payout on the main slate. And main slate, we were heavy on Tyrod Taylor, but I did everything else like around that incorrectly, right? Tyrod was kind of like Tyrod and Adonai Mitchell was what you needed, and opened everything up, but I didn't get up to the Seahawks defense. I had Puka. Thankfully, I didn't have JSM. I had Puka. So, and even with that, the slate was so ugly that, it worked out for payouts. But nothing big, but happy to have another profitable week and keep rolling this week.
Yeah. So I hit nothing. For some reason, Thanksgiving like always is terrible for me. But on to this week, we've got 11 games on this slate, like some pretty good actual football games.
Yeah.
And we have only one game with a total under 40, which is actually become rare this season. Usually we've got a handful of the 37 pointers, but just one game with a sub 40 total. That's like Tennessee and
sub 35.
35. Yeah, sorry, it's like 34 total. But like not a surprise, kind of given those offenses and in like the Cleveland defense. And then we've got one game at like 53.5 point total, which I think is a interesting starting point. I think a lot of people are going to be like starting their slate there. But I'll just add that, and we were just kind of like talking about it before the show, that it's shaping up to have some injury impact, right? Because there's Marvin Harrison out, and Michael Wilson had just been repriced, for Marvin Harrison being back in. Drake London now out, and Rome Odunze out, which is like a little bit of a surprise. And then Jaden Daniels also in, so that's a big surprise as well. And he's probably not a big impact on the FanDuel slate, but on DraftKings he's at 6,000, which is much cheaper than his regular price tag, I believe. So yeah, I guess we'll maybe start with the as many people will, like the Buffalo Cincinnati game. I'll note that it's by far the highest total of the week. I think the next 2 games are at 47.5. But there are some like weather concerns, some like potential snow because it is in Buffalo in December. But then also like 2 bad rushing defenses. So there's a possibility.
Right. I think that's big too. Yeah.
So it's potentially not the shootout that people are envisioning. But like I said, I could kind of envision like James Cook just running down in the snow at 60 yards. But I guess your thoughts on that game, are you like interested in the quarterbacks in that game? Or is there another starting point that you're looking at?
Yeah. I think the starting point is I'm going to have James Cook on all my rosters this week, and I'm probably just going to have 4 rosters in play. If I had 150 rosters, I wouldn't probably have them on all of them, but I'd probably have them on like 60 to 70%. I think that in terms of just marrying like floor, ceiling, expectations of how the Bills are going to play this game, all those things come together. And then obviously, Bengals have been, one of the 3, 4, 5, 6 toughest pass defenses all season against wide receivers. And then tight ends and running backs just smash against them. So I think we have to think about how teams score against them. And then on top of that, how the Bills have been scoring. We don't have news on Dalton Kincaid yet. It looks like that might come down to the wire. I think people won't boost Dawson Knox the way that they should if Kincaid is out. Like there have been so many times where tight ends who don't produce so much higher than they normally do against the Bengals, right? So I'll treat Dawson Knox as a pretty high confidence play. If Kincaid is out, if Kincaid is in, I think Kincaid's a very sharp play, but like that's where the Bills' ceiling is on the season is James Cook and Dalton Kincaid. That's where the ceiling is against the Bengals. You can play them together because three of the last 7 teams against the Bengals have lead running back have gone for over 50. Cook and Kincaid can easily do that here. They've gone for 35 plus in 6 of their 7 healthy Kincaid games. So yeah, I think that both those guys individually are strong ways to attack this game. Both those guys as a pairing, and then you can play it a different way. I think the main thing for me is like, you don't know what Jamar Chase's stat line is, combined stat line across 2 games against Buffalo. 9 catches, 102 yards and a touchdown, right? Because Buffalo is really good at scheming up these exotic zone looks, mixing and matching things to try to like force short area throws and take away an individual weapon. So like Jamar Chase's ceiling is so high, Josh Allen's ceiling is so high, but they're high in a game that plays out a particular way, right? So I don't think Jamar Chase is a one-off is a sharp way to play the slate. I think that you have to think about how he gets to a 35 to 40 point game. Like if you think Chase can get to a 35 to 40 point game and like Josh Allen or James Cook is not absolutely smashing, then I think you're looking at things wrong, right? So I like this game outside of Cook and Kincaid, but like I think you got to build the right way. You got to tell the story of how this plays out in such a way that this other way is the way to build it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've thought about. I think James Cook is probably the player I have the most conviction on. But I don't think I'm alone in that boat.
Right.
I guess I like try to write articles and say like, oh, I think this guy's my top quarterback, my top running back, my top wide receiver. Like I think top quarterback, top wide receiver, maybe up in the air. Top tight end, like running back. It's pretty easy. And, it's just James Cook. I think especially on DraftKings, he's actually kind of mispriced. Like on FanDuel, he's the second most expensive running back behind Jonathan Taylor, just like he is in terms of like rushing yards for the year, right? Like he's second behind Jonathan Taylor. I think, rushing touchdowns, maybe a similar story. But on DraftKings, there's a handful of like, I think Achan's more expensive than James Cook. I think,
by 1,000. Yeah.
Yeah. Bijan Robinson is more expensive. Like, why would you not just play James Cook? Like it's hard to see a situation where he fails. I think that I often have a rule on that I use, like if the Bills have kind of an average matchup, like I don't really want Josh Allen and James Cook on the same rosters because like Cook doesn't catch passes. And one of them is going to get the rushing touchdown. That means the other one isn't. But I might even like not use that rule this week just because I think they both have like pretty strong odds for a touchdown. And you could just see a situation where they have the highest implied point total in the week, but it's all coming on the ground. But behind Allen and Cook, maybe both get rushing touchdowns. And so maybe it's okay to have them on the same roster, similar to like in some situations, we would have 2 running backs from the same team on one roster, like Detroit.
Yeah.
So I guess like any thoughts maybe on like the Bills receivers, like Khalil Shakir or also then I guess the Bengals like running backs, Chase Brown and Samaje Perine, just like some players you didn't specifically mention.
Yeah, I mean, you just come out so far ahead this year playing backs and tight ends against the Bengals and just not playing wide receivers against the Bengals. And then you've come out so far ahead not playing Bills wideouts. So I'm not going to get there. Obviously, there's weird ways the game could play out that they can hit, but that one's not for me. The Bengals backfield is interesting because like Perine takes up so much work when he's playing, but he doesn't typically produce. But I did find this interesting, speaking of playing 2 backs together. Okay. 3 of the last 7 backfields against the Bills have scored 44 or more points, RB1 plus RB2. Perine and Chase Brown just 2 games ago in games where Perine's been healthy scored 42 or 44, something like that, right? So they're 10.9K. You need about 40 points from them. And then you're averaging, like, I think one of the themes this week is going to be like, well, like, it's not really a way to pay down at running back. You're actually averaging under 5.5K per running back if you play those 2 together. So there is there's a run out. I'd say it happens 15 to 20% of the time where these guys combine for 40 plus points and they lower your allocation to salary at running back and kind of allow you to do something really different from the field. And so, I haven't really been able to get comfortable with a build that has X. And I'm like, well, I still want to play James Cook, but then you don't have the flex spot to like save salary at a second tight end spot or something like that. And so it's like, it starts to get kind of dicey. And then you're like, do I need Josh Allen on this roster? What story am I telling of how this game plays out? But I do think that's live. You can also just play one of these running backs. Honestly, you could play Perine too. He scored 17 a couple games ago. You can play one of these running backs and just hope that the points flow their way. And then, and then I think you can decide, like, am I telling that with a story of Josh? Like, if you play Josh Allen and James Cook together, are you going to tell it as a story of like a 45-38 game and like stack it all up? Or are you just going to play it as like, well, maybe they score 31 and just all the touchdowns flow through these two guys?
I think more towards the latter. I really wasn't actually thinking about like, I'm going to like build a single entry roster and start with Josh Allen and James Cook. I was actually thinking more for my multi build. I'm not going to set that rule that prevents it. So out of maybe 150 rosters, I might end up with like a handful that have Allen and Cook, which I normally would not do. Like normally be like a rule created that says that's like definitely
I got you.
I don't think it's like the most likely way that it plays out, and if their cost was different, right, then I would be maybe starting a single entry roster that way. But I think there's a good chance I might, for single entry, I might even do a Joe Burrow, James Cook lineup, and then a Josh Allen and like Cincinnati running back lineup, right? And like I'm like, can I look at Samaje Perine a little closer? I think he's 4,200. It'll most likely be Chase Brown though, and potentially use Dalton Kincaid on that roster or Bills tight end, and then kind of build my rosters from there. I do think then for like my next single entry rosters, let's say I'm doing 6, I probably am then looking at one game in particular after this game, which is the Rams and the Cardinals, which I think just got a lot more appealing with Marvin Harrison out, as it has a few times over the past few weeks, where now Marvin Harrison is out. Trey McBride is actually appropriately priced up now, but Michael Wilson, especially for what he's done without Marvin Harrison, is back down in price. And then that fits so well with like a Matthew Stafford or a Matthew Stafford roster or a Jacoby Brissett roster, right? You can then maybe put Puka on that roster or Devontae Adams, and then kind of go from there. Any thoughts on that game? I guess just to clarify, Wilson's price is down a few $100s on DraftKings. I think it's like down $1,000 on FanDuel. So he's going to like absolutely pop on FanDuel.
Yeah. I mean, even at 5,600 on. So I thought this was interesting. I've been saying for years, like just try to help people understand pricing and what your expectations should be, that DraftKings generally prices players in such a way that they'll hit roughly 4x their salary, roughly 25% of the time. So I was going through all the wide receivers priced at 5K and above on this season, right? And taking like a relevant sample. So this was when I thought Marvin Harrison Jr. would play. All the way, there's like 287 games that I was accounting for of wide receivers priced 5K and above. They've hit at a sub 6.6% rate this year for 4x their salary. So like wide receiver has been incredibly difficult this year to keep your rosters on a 200-point pace. And then if you're playing like 3-4 uncorrelated wide receivers together on a roster, you're trying to get like 1 in a 53,000 shot of getting all 4 guys right and keeping on a 200-point pace. I say that to say Michael Wilson at 5,600, like he's done it both times that Marvin Harrison Jr. has been out. He had 15 targets and 18 targets. We know that they can't run. We know they're probably going to be trailing in this game against the Rams. And we know they're comfortable concentrating targets. And then also the way that the Rams play defense, their thought is like, we're going to disrupt a drive, right? They're not thinking like, we're going to take away your lead weapon. So I said this on my show with Pete yesterday, like, I think the chances of Michael Wilson being under 12 targets are dramatically lower than the chances of Jamar Chase being under 12 targets, right? Because the Bills, their thing is like, we're going to force you to march the field. You're going to make a mistake at some point. And if you get into the, red zone, we're going to hold you to a field goal. And that means like, we're going to make it tough for you to march the field. Whereas the Rams, it's like, we're not taking away we're not scheming away one weapon. We're just going to keep thinking that eventually we're going to disrupt your drive, right? And with our pass rush, with like our aggressiveness, whatever it is, we're going to force you to make a mistake. So like those targets are going to be there for Michael Wilson this week. So yeah, I mean, I think that he's just a really strong way to go. We talked about this, I guess we and I didn't talk last week, but I was talking about this last week. You look under the hood with Puka. 2 weeks ago, his usage was back to what it had been early in the season. They'd kind of shed this 3 tight end stuff. Last week, same thing, like the snap share is back up, the target share is back up. And so like there's signal that we're going to start getting the weeks like he was getting early in the year. So I like JSN a little bit more than Puka, but I'm totally fine with anybody who wants to rank them differently than that. I think Puka's really sharp. I want to get him onto one of my 3 or 4 rosters this week. So I don't know that I'm going to build around the game. It's like I kind of, and I really like McBride, right? I think that I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop on Brissett, and I think the Rams, a match against the Rams is a spot where it could happen. So I'm not actually on Brissett on my tighter builds, but he's like right on the fringe. He's like the one guy getting cut off. Yeah, Wilson, McBride, Puka. I think those are the three guys to me where it's like, yeah, you just can go back to the well on these guys right now.
Yeah. Just for note, Michael Wilson's targets the last two games without Marvin Harrison, 15 targets and 18 targets, 10 receptions and 15 receptions. Jacoby Brissett has put up at least 20 DraftKings points in each of his starts.
Yeah,
he has not been
7
projected.
for 7. It's insane.
Yeah, 7 for 7. Not one single one of those weeks has he been like projected anywhere that I know of for 20 DraftKings points.
Yeah,
but he's hit it every single time. So yeah, actually, but interestingly, in the same price range as Jacoby Brissett and Michael Wilson, I didn't think this would happen, but like Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin, Jaden Daniels just 300 more than Brissett, Terry McLaurin actually 400 cheaper than Michael Wilson. I know it's like a Vikings defense that we don't necessarily pick on, but it seems like strange pricing. Any thoughts on that? Because that is probably another, if I'm doing 5-6 single entry rosters, that's probably going to be a starting point, and then it's like stack another name.
Yeah, I don't have an argument against it. I'm not going to go there. Minnesota's allowed the fewest catches to wide receivers in the NFL this year. And, Jaden, his best game this year is like 21 DraftKings points. Like, I don't know that we're necessarily getting like the high end run out against Minnesota. Also I know that the Washington defense has been worse, but hasn't been good this year, but since Dan Quinn took over play calling, they've been better. And JJ McCarthy's been just bad, kind of regardless of who he's playing against. And so I could see the Commanders kind of controlling a lower scoring game, and then they're calling the game to the matchup that they have, right? Of you're not getting super aggressive against Minnesota. So that's kind of how I'm approaching this one. But it's kind of one of those where I'm like, that's not going to be in my tighter pool. But I'm also McLaurin is a guy that was kind of on the fringes for me even before the Jaden news. And I think it's perfectly sharp. It's just not for me this week.
Yeah. I think I'll probably go there. There is a concern. It just turns into a Chris Rodriguez game. And you're just watching the clock, bleed away as the Vikings aren't able to do anything on the other side of the ball. But I think it's worth a shot in a percentage of rosters, and even like a double digit percentage of rosters, if I did a handful of single entry. We'll move on we have 3 games that have totals of 47.5 or more. And the third one is Indianapolis and Jacksonville. We've got Trevor Lawrence there, playing at home. But the Colts have been a good offense, have Jonathan Taylor. Thoughts on that game? Is that a place that you think you'll go to a lot in single entry or otherwise?
Yeah. That one, for me, I think my main quarterbacks are Trevor Lawrence and Tyrod Taylor. And Tyrod, it's because the Dolphins are such a funnel toward tight ends that you can play Tyrod and Mason Taylor. Only the Bengals have boosted tight end production more than the Dolphins this year. And they're 8.2K, and it's they're probably going to score equal to, or if you played out this slate 100 times, they would score equal to or better than Jamar Chase 50% of the time at the same price tag, right? So it's you save the salary and then you can kind of work the rest of your roster. But in terms of stacking something up and hoping for ceiling, Trevor Lawrence is the guy I'm leaning toward. I think you can also go Daniel Jones. He's not going to be mobile or get the rushing yards right now, but it's a good spot for it. And my thinking is the Jags they're in first place in this division, right? Over the Texans, who everybody's talking about right now, over the Colts, who have been, a Super Bowl favorite throughout the season. And it's the Jags in first place, and they beat the 49ers, they beat the Chiefs, they smashed the Chargers, and they're underdogs at home, right? And so my thinking is just from a narrative perspective, this team is going to feel motivated to come out, be aggressive. Since the bye, Liam Cohen has had this team score 30 against Las Vegas, 29 against Houston, 35 against the Chargers, 27 against Arizona, and then 25 against Tennessee, where they took their foot off the gas really early in a blowout win. No other team has scored over 20 against Houston, and only two other teams have scored more than 21 against the Chargers. So it's Liam Cohen's pushing all the right buttons. And then I think that it's a good spot. The Jags face the highest opponent pass play rate in the NFL because they're so tough to run against. So I think it's a good spot for the Colts to be throwing. And I think we just have a really nice setup for a game that wouldn't surprise me if it ends up being 38-34 or something like that. And I think it's a spot where we can kind of lean into it and try to capture some upside here.
For that game, so for I think on DraftKings, Jonathan Taylor's price is down 700. It's down 1,300 on FanDuel from like his high point this season. Like you just said the Jags are tough to run on, but Taylor does contribute in the passing game as well. Like, do you think you would go there, maybe even on FanDuel where it's like more touchdown dependent, and he's got a bigger price discount? Or is that just still too expensive?
Yeah, I mean, I could see going there. I think like on my tightest build, right, where I'm saying where's my highest confidence.
Yep.
I think you take on such a low floor because you are so touchdown dependent. In terms of pre-touchdown production, he's wildly overpriced, right? Like usually it's around Thanksgiving that I like to start calculating just pre-touchdown points per game. And I mean, he like in terms of pre-touchdown scoring, his price should be in like the 7K range, like maybe 7,500 or something. I forget exactly what it was, but he's wildly overpriced for pre-touchdown production, but it's because of all the touchdowns that he's priced so high. So the question is like, do we think he gets 2 or 3 touchdowns here? And he probably needs the 3 because it's such a tougher matchup on the ground. So it's not for me, but I don't think it's a bad play, right? If you're looking for unique ways to stack up this game, I think you get to first place in a tournament without getting that far off the board. But yeah, I mean, I certainly, I think it's going to be unique this week to get there.
Yeah, I think it's probably on the fringe of like single entry format. I do kind of like this game and trying to figure out how to play it. And I do think like a Trevor Lawrence, like with Jonathan Taylor, use some like cheaper Jags, wide receivers and tight ends. It's probably not going to be like, I think it'll be played less in its chances of hitting. Like once we really start the games on Sunday. So it's something I'm considering and like how to play that game. You mentioned actually you touched on the Miami Jets game, and you mentioned Tyrod Taylor, but you think you'll play him with the tight end. Like, would you run Devon Achane or Jalen Waddle back on that roster, or is it more of a maybe you play Tyrod Taylor? Like, any interest in AD Mitchell, or are you like over kind of skipping over him for Mason Taylor? And then like stack a rest of another game, or just put on like one-offs. I guess.
Yeah, I think like on my Tyrod and Mason Taylor builds, I haven't been forcing Achane, but like Achane is one of my favorite plays this week. He's still like slightly underpriced at a point in the season where most players are overpriced, right? If we just take his sample of post Tyreek and then remove the Cleveland game, and I think that's one of the things to think about at this point. I was thinking about this while we were driving from one location to another and I was finishing up my player grid. I was thinking about like, one of the things we really should be thinking about deep into the season is where does the DraftKings algorithm, because we can get under the hood and really understand how DraftKings prices players, but they don't account for outlier types of games. Like they don't account for the fact that that game in Cleveland was such a weird game, right? And so Achane's price is still a little bit lower than it should be based on his usage post Tyreek. So Achane, like I really like Achane, but I haven't built those rosters and been like, and I've got to get Achane onto these. So Achane has been a priority for me this week. If I have 4 rosters this week, I probably want to have at least 2 with Achane, and it makes sense to get it onto a Tyrod one, but I also don't think it's completely necessary. If I'm like, I can get James Cook and Bucky Irving and Puka, if I sacrifice from Achane down to Bucky Irving, that allows me to get Puka and still really like the whole, like something like that, right? I'd be fine doing that. Waddle, no, just because this, on a per target basis or on a per dropback basis, his usage is really high, but like they're hiding Tua. They're playing through their defense and their run game right now, and it's working. And then AD Mitchell, again, like I think that people underrate tight end funnels, like teams that take away wide receivers and force targets to the tight end. So teams underrate that against the Bengals. They underrate that against Miami. And so like AD Mitchell, you take out his 52-yarder last week. He had 7 catches for 50 yards. Like, I think he's still going to get the targets, right? But no wide receiver one has seen 10 targets against Miami all season this year. And so I think we're kind of looking more at like the AD Mitchell 8-9 targets. If he's efficient, 5-6 catches, you get like the 60-70 yards. But like, I think his chances for like a repeat of last week are relatively low. So I don't mind the play, but I'm not going to be on it. Like I prefer to play it through like, we're going to get a matchup boost for Mason Taylor, and he's so cheap and people won't really play him. And that price tag, that 8.2K is easy for me to wrap my head around, like what I'm expecting there. So yeah, I like the Tyrod plus Mason Taylor a little bit more. And I'm not against AD Mitchell even as a one-off, but that's not the direction I'm going to go.
So One of the things that came out just before the show looks like Odunze is going to miss the game. So that's probably going to elevate some of the Chicago, remaining Chicago pass catchers. And first guy that comes to mind is Luther Burden. He's still pretty cheap. I think 3,800 on DraftKings. He's a guy I've been like rating up as probably going to see a bigger role as the season goes on for a few weeks now. And it's actually kind of worked out. He's got, last week, 4 receptions, 33 yards, but probably going to see more opportunity without Odunze. Any thoughts on that game? Also, like in the other side of that game, Josh Jacobs in a pretty good situation. And then Jordan Love, maybe a guy I'd have interest in for my like multi-entry build. Thoughts on Chicago and Green Bay?
Yeah, I'd say Love is probably my 5th quarterback. If it's like Lawrence, Tyrod, Josh Allen, Brissett, Love. So like if I were building early in the season, I was building like 14 to 19 single entry rosters. And lately I've just been down to 3 or 4. If I were building 14 to 19, it'd be definitely Brissett and Love in that pool. So like those plays, I'll hit Jacobs. First thoughts on Jacobs. Just my thought on Jacobs is like he is overpriced. Based on like pre-touchdown production, he should be like 6.3K. He's hit over 21 points twice this year, and it was against Cincinnati and early season Dallas. So he can hit. I think I'd rather find the 200 more to get up to Bucky Irving or the 1K more to get up to James Cook. Jacobs is kind of like the 4th running back on my list, but I think there's a decent sized gap between the top 3, Achane, Cook, and Bucky and Jacobs, right? So I think he can hit. He can outscore all those guys, but he's going to be popular. And to me, like if he's my 4th guy with a gap, I'm going to just treat it as edge and not play him. And then the other side, yeah, it's funny. I was ahead on this week and writing up a lot of my player grid last night, and I wrote up Luther Burden as a cheap with upside option. I actually wrote I would prefer it if Odunze plays, because I think that if Odunze's out, it won't dramatically change his expectations, but it will dramatically bump up his ownership. But he's still a sharp way to save salary. If you've got to save salary. And I think Colston Loveland also, like, speaking of guys who've gotten more involved deeper into the season, both these guys, Loveland across like the last 6-7 weeks, Luther Burden across the last 4 weeks since they came out of bye, both of them have seen their roles like definitely grow, right? Not dramatically, but it's very clear that they're more involved. And now Noah Odunze, not that he's scoring fantasy points, not that Caleb Williams can be relied on to hit the target, but the usage is high, right? The usage has been elite for Odunze. So certainly extra targets available going to, and Ben Johnson even actually made him said something about this earlier in the week about basically like essentially alluding to the idea that their game plan this week against the Packers will not be what their game plan against the Eagles was. Cause like you can't attack the Packers that way. You can't just run the ball on the Packers. So if that's the case, like he's probably thinking like, hey, we got to put more on Caleb Williams' plate this week. We got to throw more, and now no Rome Odunze. I do think both these guys, Loveland and Burden, are pretty sharp ways to save salary this week.
I've actually been writing kind of the same blurb for Colston Loveland and Luther Burden for a few weeks about how I expect them to get more involved as the season progresses. They were both highly drafted. Loveland, the 1st round pick, Luther Burden, a 2nd round pick. General managers love to like make their picks shine, right? As the season comes to a close, and you're doing, exit interviews with the owner or whatever, right? You want to say like, wow, look at these guys I acquired with the, in the draft. They're future stars. Like you keep me around a few more years, right? These guys are gonna, be monsters in the league. We actually were kind of discussing that with on my 12:30 show about that like AD Mitchell, maybe the same kind of thing of like, we're just going to get
keep feeding them. Yeah.
Man, what a great trade. So actually, I wanted to actually circle back because you mentioned.
Wait, I have a question. Would you play? Because I messed around with this earlier in the week, and I was like, the numbers aren't good enough. But now with Odunze out, I'm thinking about it again. Would you play Burden and Loveland together, 7K in salary? Like, again, when I looked at it with Odunze playing, it was like, the numbers just aren't quite there. But, it might bump from like an expectation of 8 to 10 targets up to like 12 to 14 targets for 7K, with both guys can hit for big plays. Both guys can score touchdowns. Any thoughts on that?
I would lean towards, if I was doing, I think it's actually very well priced. Like Luther Burden's 3,800, Loveland is 3,200. I'd say that like if I'm using 2 roster spots, I probably want at least one like touchdown, hopefully 2 touchdowns, right? And then I would be like very inclined to use like Caleb Williams on that roster, or at least like Josh Jacobs, right? Like maybe I'm doing a Tyrod Taylor. I guess the price, I have to spend the money at some point in the roster, right? But like a Tyrod Taylor and maybe Mason Taylor or something. If I'm using that as like a starting point for my roster, maybe I do like a weird stack of this Green Bay Chicago game without Caleb Williams or Jordan Love, where it's Josh Jacobs, Luther Burden, and Colston Loveland. So I do think, I mean, that's really well priced. I'll say on my 12:30 show, somebody is Neil Orfield started saying, like, if you take this player and add this player, it's this much in salary, and their average production is this. And everybody yelled, "That's a JM to win thing." Like, that's JM to win thing, right? Adding the salaries.
I mean, the more I can do that on like contest sub 2K entries, the more I love it, right? Like, it's, to me, I don't need the 2 touchdowns. It's like guaranteed points are so valuable in a sport. DFS, we'll call it a sport, in a sport where most people are trying to be perfect instead of trying to be perfectly sound. And it's like every time where I can just find production from 2 players. So yeah, I mean, this is one that I'll play around with deeper into the week for sure.
So just one thing I want to circle back, because you did your quarterback list. I noticed no Matthew Stafford. Any thoughts on Stafford? Like, any reason, is he like definitely not on your list, or any reason why he would not be?
Yeah, I think it's just a pricing thing, right? Like across the slate, like how I have to structure rosters. One of the things I've recorded like a bonus Winner Circle podcast for Inner Circle members last night to kind of talk about, I think, how we allocate salary is important this week. And one of the things I talked about was I think that now everybody's pool of confident plays is going to be different, but I think we're going to have a lot of rosters this week that have like 2 or 3 plays on it where you're like, that's not that confident. Like you're really hoping to get lucky, like low percentage, hoping to get lucky on that play. And I think it's possible to build rosters this week where you only have one of those plays with 2 pay up options. I want to get minimum of like 2 7K and above players on all my rosters. Bucky Irving, Trey McBride, JSN, Puka, whoever it is, right? James Cook, Devon Acham. I want to get minimum of 2 of those on my rosters, and I want to have maximum of 1 player where I'm like, I don't love this play, right? And I think a lot of rosters are going to have 2 or 3 of those plays on them, and I don't think we have to do that. And so like going up to Stafford, where you're not hoping for like if you go up to Josh Allen, you're like, I can paint a picture of this being a 40-point game, Josh Allen game. I can't paint a picture of us getting like a 38-point Stafford game. I'm painting a picture of him getting me like 4x his salary. And if I'm painting that picture, then it's like, I think there's better ways to spend the salary. And that's just how I'm looking at the slate. But yeah, it has nothing to do with Stafford as a play. It's more about like holistically, how am I looking at the slate and how do I want to allocate salary? If I'm paying up, it's got to be a guy where I'm like, this guy can smash and post a score you had to have. Like Burrow can do that, right? Burrow can put up 32 to 35 in the game environment that we could paint a picture of here. I can't paint that picture for Stafford, so I'll be off Stafford this week. I think he's a fine play in a vacuum. I just think like rosters are going to look better without him.
All right. Any final thoughts on the week?
No, it's a fun week. I like this week. I feel good about it this week.
Yeah, should be a good week. Thanks to everybody for tuning in, and hope to see you at the top of the leaderboards, and we will catch you next week.